nice turnout. Thank you all for coming. I'm trying to find a good spot to stand, but I appreciate you guys taking the time on a weekend to come. It's pretty chilly out there too. But my goal with this was to try and help just obviously educate folks, but share knowledge about a concept that I think is very confusing for a lot of people and can be very difficult for adults and children. And if anything, I was hoping to make this obviously very useful for all of you. So I encourage you therefore to stop me and ask any questions, and make sure that the concerns or questions that you brought in with you today get answered. So and there is food behind me here. Please do not hesitate if you're thirsty or hungry to go grab something. But I have right here just on the board a very simple list of the things that I wanted to get through. Sorry if you can't see, but I wanted to begin by talking about the definitions of food allergies. And this is where a lot of the confusion arises, because we hear a lot about various different types of allergies in terms of food. We hear about gluten sensitivity a lot, many different things. And so I wanted to begin there. When you think about food allergies, the definition is such that there are antibodies in the blood, antibodies being proteins that float around, that are specifically produced to recognize a specific food. So when someone is peanut allergic, for example, they have a higher level of antibodies against peanut, and that's one of the things that you measure. And I'll talk about that when I get to the sort of diagnosis part of this. But it's important to mention that, because when you hear about things like celiac disease or lactose intolerance, these are things that are outside of that realm of allergy, and that's because there are not antibodies produced in those cases, in celiac disease as well as lactose intolerance. And I'll get into that a little bit more if you guys would like. But I wanted to just begin by saying that allergy is strictly defined as a case where there are those antibodies, and they basically are floating around in the blood, and that explains why when someone is exposed to, say, peanut, I'm going to use peanut as a big example, and I'll get into why in a little bit, but if someone is exposed to peanut, the body recognizes it very, very quickly, because these antibodies are floating in the blood and constantly getting circulated. So you can imagine then that as they're floating around, they're very quickly going to be coming into contact with the peanut or whatever other food it might be. So any questions at all about defining a food allergy that anybody has? So there are different types of antibodies in the blood. When you get a vaccine, for example, if we get a polio vaccine or tetanus, it basically is a way to tell the body's immune system to produce antibodies. Antibodies are produced in the bone marrow and by cells in the body, white blood cells, that are meant to fight infection. Part of their job, though, is to make antibodies. And there are certain specialized cells in the body that are meant to make these things. So the type of antibody that is produced against, let's say, tetanus or polio or the flu, we're in flu season, so the flu shot, same thing, is a little bit different than the type of antibody that is responsible for allergy. So there are 5 different types of antibodies. One of them is responsible for the vaccine I was talking about, or protecting us against the things we're vaccinated against. But there's a different type that is designed to cause these reactions to allergy. Now, the next question that people often have is, okay, why does our body do that? Why do we make antibodies and produce a reaction that can be harmful? And the thought is that this specific type of antibody is a bit of a remnant, so to speak, of times past when humans were exposed to parasites. And there's certainly parts of this world where people are very often still exposed to parasites. And this antibody actually can be protective against those parasites. However, in this country, we don't have as many parasites. And the thought is that rather than dealing with those, they act in a different way and can generate this reaction. It's essentially considered an overreaction. And that's a very easy way to define allergies in general. So if someone is allergic to pollen in the air or foods, either way, it's an overactive immune system. So one thing that comes up sometimes is people say, you know, I'm sick all the time with allergies. Is my immune system too weak? You know, am I somehow vulnerable to these things? And the answer is actually it's the polar opposite. The immune system is actually too strong. And there's even recent data showing that some people with allergies are less likely to get cancer. And the thought is that's because the immune system is so active that it's more capable or more easily capable of detecting those cancer cells and getting rid of them. So it's an interesting idea, but the thought is to keep in mind is that the immune system is sort of overactive, and that's what's happening. I mentioned the parasite idea, and a good illustration of that is if you look at parts of this world where people are exposed to parasites more frequently. So if you think of areas like sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where there are higher rates of parasitic infections, there are virtually no food allergies there. Really allergies in general are almost non-existent. And so the thought is that the immune system is sort of acting the way it's supposed to, and it's exposed to things that in the environment that it's sort of meant to act against. And in cases where there are not these parasites, such as the United States largely and other developed countries or parts of the world, the rates of parasites are low, but the rates of allergies are high. And so with probiotics, the thought is actually that you're almost redirecting the immune system a little bit and giving it the proper way to act in a sense. And so there actually is evidence that probiotics will help reduce some of these allergies, again, by sort of redirecting things.